Blue. Blue. There we go. Thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to be subtle. But no? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, we're in chapter 10 of First Kings. If you'd like to turn there, that would be great. We'll just wait for the hand dryer to finish, and then we'll pray. Yeah, Lord Jesus, thank you for your word. Thank you for everything you speak to us, Father. Help us this morning as we read this passage. Pray that you'd help us learn from it. Give us ears that are open to the words your Spirit is speaking this morning, and give us hearts to understand, hearts that are soft, that can receive the teaching this morning, that you'd help me open this up to everyone, and pray you'd anoint the words that we read, that we hear this morning, so that they have impact in our hearts and our lives, that we don't just leave the same people that we came in this morning. We thank you for each heart that's here this morning, and we ask for your Spirit to do a work in each of us. In Jesus' name, amen. So, we know from last time round that King Solomon was he'd finished building all his palaces and things like that, and then it talks about his dealings with Hiram, who was his supplier of all the wood and various things and labor to build his various projects. And then we start to see a sort of a glimmer, or the beginnings of Solomon's mistakes, and how he's building up excessive amounts of gold and things like that. And sadly, that's going to expand today, and so we'll read the section of Solomon's latest exploits. So he's got a visitor. It says, when the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, the report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of almug wood and precious stones. The king used the almug wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood has never been imported or seen since that day. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, not including the revenue from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the territories. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold, 600 shekels. Thank you. Sorry. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold, 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 small shields of hammered gold with 3 minas of gold in each shield. The king put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. Then the king made a great throne covered with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps, and its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests with a lion standing beside each of them. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one at either end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years it returned, carrying gold and silver and ivory and apes and baboons. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world saw audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, and spices, and horses and mules. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones and cedar, as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kew. The royal merchants purchased them from Kew at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and of the Arameans. So there we go. Getting a little bit excessive now, isn't it? Let's read, before we get into this passage, just want to read, and we've already read bits of it, but I want to read the entirety of Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14 to 18. So this is Deuteronomy. It's the law God gave his people. Some of the laws obviously were for a time ahead in the future. This one certainly was, because it was before they even had a king, and so he was giving them laws for the king. When they, appoint a king, these were the laws that God wanted for the king. And we've already read a couple of them, but let's just read all 4 verses. It says, "When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, and you have taken possession of it, and settled in it, and you say, 'Let us set a king over us, like all the nations around us,' be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your fellow Israelites. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not an Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law taken from that of the Levitical priests. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees, and not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites, and turn from the law to the right or to the left, then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel. And so God knows what we're like. He knows what you're like. He knows what I'm like. He knows what every human is like. And the dangers of, I guess, believing our own PR. You know, we look maybe at our bank balance, or we look at our material possessions. We look at what people are saying to us. We look at who is coming to listen to us. And we can start to think that we've made it. Now, this is Solomon at the peak of his reign. Yeah, let's go back to it. It says, this is the verse. Let's find it. It was, there we go, verse 23 of chapter 10. This is the statement. It says, King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. So you could describe him almost, obviously he's not, but he is king over all the other kings, in terms of he's the most powerful person in the world. And yet we know he's not. We know that he has only got what he's got because of God who gave it to him. But unfortunately, this is the downfall. This is the very beginning, and from this point onwards, he's already started breaking Leviticus chapter 17's laws, and now we see this accelerate. We've seen hints of Egypt, haven't we? Every now and again, Pharaoh's daughter is kind of dropped into the story. And then at the end of this section, what does it say? Verse 29, it says, they imported a chariot from Egypt. The very chariots that were pursuing the people, seeking to literally kill and destroy them, they're now importing those chariots into their kingdom. If you stop and think about that, that's just crazy, isn't it? It's just crazy that they were literally running for their lives, fearing for their lives. God delivers them in the greatest miracle that they'd seen at that point, and possibly one of the greatest miracles ever. And now they're importing these chariots in. And you kind of think, what is going on? And clearly, God had said in Leviticus 17, don't bring anything from Egypt. And yet what have they done? They've put their orders in. They've sent their purchase orders. Yes, we would like these chariots that used to pursue trying to kill us, but now we want them in our kingdom again, and we're going to become like them. And so we've got all these things going on, and they're just terrible. Let's see. So first of all, he's got this visit from the Queen of Sheba. Now, the Queen of Sheba, she's not a poor lady. She's got plenty of wealth herself. And so she's not coming to Solomon necessarily for his wealth. She's coming for his wisdom. Because if you look at verse 1, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have Google, you didn't have AI. You heard that there was a king in Israel who could answer all your hard questions, solve all the riddles, answer all the questions about life. And so she traveled a great distance and brought a lot, so much stuff that I think it said, never again, verse 10, she brought so much stuff, it says, never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. She brought in 120 talents of gold and various things like that. But really what she was after was the wisdom that God gave Solomon. And obviously he passes all the tests with flying colors, so much so that she's blown away, and she's like, I heard that he was good, but I'm overwhelmed by everything that I've seen. And she's seen, all the kind of officials, the seats, their robes, the cupbearers, the offerings, the food on the table, all of that. She's blown away. And you kind of think, King Solomon at this point can think, you know what? I've made it. This really powerful queen with lots of money has come and given me her seal of approval. But the seal of approval that we all need is not the rich people in the world. The seal of approval, I guess you could say the review, whenever you buy something these days, especially if you buy it online, what do you always get within a couple of days or a week of after you buy it? It's like, oh, tell us what you think, review this product for us. Or, you go to a restaurant and they give you a little card, don't they, with like a QR code. I'll scan that, give us some feedback. We want your feedback. And she's given Solomon her feedback, and it's all good. It's all good. And sometimes we can start to care more about the approval of humans than the approval of God. It's interesting, in 1 Kings, Solomon's actually stopped talking now. The last time we actually heard directly from Solomon is in chapter 8. And we don't hear from him again. From 8 to the end of his life, we don't actually hear a word he said. But let's just read the last things that he said, or that he's quoted in 1 Kings. It's where he's actually praying to God, and it's interesting. He says, "Praise be to the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good." So this is chapter 8, verse 56. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him to walk in obedience to him and keep the commands, decrees, and laws, including Deuteronomy 17, he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth, including the Queen of Sheba, may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. And may our hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands, including Deuteronomy 17, as at this time. And so these are literally his last words. And then we don't hear from Solomon again. And it's interesting that the last words that are quoted are him praying to God. And one of the first things that the enemy will do, especially when we're successful, is say, you know what, we don't have time to pray to God. Or you don't need to, because look at all your success. We don't need to thank God for everything he's done. We don't need to ask him for help, because look at us, we're the richest and most powerful person in the world. We don't need God's help now. He'll silence you from speaking the truth, and he'll keep you quiet. And that's the last time. And the last words are that we would obey his commands. And then we don't hear from him again. And so he starts disobeying God's commands. If we stop talking to God and hearing from him every day, then we start to do our own thing. Because, Jesus prayed every day, didn't he, that it's not my will, but your will be done. And I know, obviously, in his younger days, we see a change, don't we? If we just go to chapter 3, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 10, we see Solomon go from humble and not having a clue and having, not much at all relatively compared to what he has now. But it says, verse 10, if we just go, verse 9, sorry. I think. So here we go. Actually, no, go verse 8 as well. There we go. So he calls himself, "Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number." Then he says, "So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right or wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" And so he's basically saying, I don't have the ability to do this. I don't really know what I'm doing. This job is too difficult for me. I need your help. I'm your servant. I need your help. And interestingly, the reason he's asking for help, is it for him? The benefactors of Solomon asking God for wisdom are his people. So his life is focused on his people and the best for his people, so he can bring about justice and righteousness for his people. And if we go to verse 28 of chapter 3, what did people see? It says, when all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God. And so his wisdom glorified God. Now, unfortunately, let's just see. If we go to chapter 10, verse 14, we'll see a little clue. Obviously, the last few chapters, we've seen little clues of saying, something's not quite right here. This verse is problematic. It says, the weight of the gold that Solomon received not once, but yearly, was 666 talents. Now, if you know your Bible at all, you'll generally know that if you ask someone what's your favorite number and they go 666, you'll be like, really? There are plenty of other numbers to choose from. How much gold do you want? 666 talents? Could you give me 667 or 665? No, we'll go with 666. It's just a little clue that something's wrong. Now, 7 in Hebrew, or I guess to the Israelites and to Jewish people, is God's number of perfection. The number of days it took him to create the world. And 6 is basically one short of perfection. You'll notice humans made on day 6. And it's basically, 6 means just one short of God's perfection, or short of God's perfection. You know, the Bible says we all fall short of the glory of God. So, on our own, we're 6s. With God, we're 7s. And so 666 means completely of man. We've kind of not got out of the picture. And so his gold coming in represents everything that kind of man standing in rebellion to God, without God, apart from God. And it's every year. I mean, you know, you kind of think, well, how have they managed to get that much gold exactly every year? So, and the only other place, obviously 666 is mentioned, is in Revelation in relation to the number of the beast, which basically stands for complete rebellion against God and his people. And so here we see that in Solomon's splendor, he's abandoned God's call in his life. He's abandoned God's decrees, God's commands to him in Deuteronomy 17. And then you'll see that following the 666 talents of gold, he makes large shields. Verse 16, King Solomon made 200 shields of hammered gold. For what? For a war? No, because you wouldn't make a shield out of gold. It's pretty soft. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. So he's got excessive gold here at this point. It's like, well, what do I do with all this gold? I know, I'll make some shields that are no good for a battle. So where shall I put them? It says in verse 17, the king put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. So he's just putting them in a palace. And then he's like, right, what else can I do with my gold? Verse 18. Then the king made a great throne. For who? For himself. Remember, we go from chapter 3, where he's asking for wisdom. I'm just a boy. I don't know what to do. I need help to serve my people. And 7 chapters later, he's got excessive gold and he's making a throne for himself. It says he made a great throne covered with ivory, overlaid with fine gold, had 6 steps, and why not put a lion on each step? Rather than just one lion, let's go for a lion on either side. And it says nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. All of Solomon's goblets, were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because, silver, that's no good. The king had a fleet of trading ships. A fleet at sea along with the ships of Hiram. Once every year it returned carrying gold, silver, and ivory, and apes and baboons, because, that's what everyone needs to serve God. It's not, is it? He's completely gone astray. In terms of when he took up his throne, God didn't say, build a great throne with a golden lion on each end of each step, and import apes and baboons. What he said to him, let's just go back, Deuteronomy 17. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself, chapter 17, verse 18, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law taken from that of the Levitical priests. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord, his God, and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees, and not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites, and turn from the law to the right or the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel. So if he'd spent more time writing out what God had said to him on a scroll and reading it every day than making golden lions on his throne, things would have worked out better. And so this is the danger for all of us. You know, God will give us wisdom. If we ask for it, he'll give us wisdom. And people will notice that. People will notice you. They'll notice there's something different about you. But the danger is when we start to believe our own hype, and when people say, oh, you're wonderful, and all of things like that, and you think, oh, maybe I am better than other people. And that's it. You've gone. Like, you've just basically given in to Satan's temptation that actually you are able to do things by yourself, that you don't need to rely every day on God. And we see this, don't we? I mean, he's getting lots of gold, he's getting lots of ivory, stones, apes, baboons, shekels of silver, horses. He's got everything that you could possibly desire, and yet he's fallen short of the glory of God. He's lost his way, and God isn't there with him. And then, obviously, in chapter 11, we read about all his, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then he gets enemies rising up, defeating him, and then he dies. So it's not a great end to his life. But the splendor that Solomon had was just incredible. And ultimately, the people out there, the people outside the church, are not looking for a church that's filled with magnificent gold or jewels or fancy, amazing lighting or amazing sounding music or whatever, the best coffee or biscuits or cake or food. They're not looking for any of that. What they're looking for is the wisdom that comes from God that brings about righteousness. If you look at verse, I think it was chapter 3. Let's just have a look. Verse 10 and 11, I think. He asked for wisdom. Let me find it. Verse 7. Let's read verse 7. We've read it already, but it says, Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child. I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people too numerous to count on number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. So that is the job of the church, to seek God, to fear God. As the Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you fear God, he'll give you wisdom. What do you use that wisdom to do? To govern the people of this nation. Now, obviously, we're not the government, but spiritually we are the government of this nation. To govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. And that's where the church, the established church, and many churches have lost their way, in that they start to kind of have human wisdom, because they don't fear God. They get their own wisdom, and they think, oh, actually, that thing that we've considered wrong all this time, maybe it's not right. Maybe we've misunderstood God. Maybe God's not been clear. Maybe we've got it wrong, and maybe we actually need to make people happy. And so we change what is right and wrong, rather than being loyal and faithful to what God has said. And then the church isn't interested. But when we stand for what's right, when we use God's wisdom, when we say, this is wrong, this is right, this is good, this is bad, then the world will be interested. Some people will hate you. Maybe even a lot of people will hate us. But ultimately, people will come and they will receive from God, because you've remained faithful to his laws, his decrees, and his commands, just as in chapter 8 King Solomon prayed. But instead, as a church, I guess, in this nation, in the whole, we've neglected God, and as a result, enemies have risen up. We've lost those enemies, and the church has suffered. And in many places, churches have closed, and so it all hinges on, do we stick to what God has said? Do we do what he said? Do we write out his commands? Do we read them every day? Do we remind ourselves that we are no better than anyone else? Or do we end up being led astray by all the riches that often come our way? They're not a sign of God's blessings, but often God's blessing, material blessings do follow us when we put our lives right. But they're no kind of way to measure our spiritual health. And we shouldn't become reliant or think that we've made it, just as Solomon did. Interestingly, I'm just going to kind of finish with this. It says, Proverbs 3, verse 13. Well, actually, I'm going to finish with four verses. Proverbs 3:13 says, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. For she is more profitable." Now remember, we're not talking about material money here. She is more profitable. That may come, because generally when you put your life right, things work. It's not a hard and fast rule, but generally it happens. "For she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her." "Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed." So Solomon held it, but when all his riches and fame and gold thrones came his way, his grip on God's wisdom started to slip, and he thought, you know what, I'll let go. I've got all these 700 wives, I've got this gold throne, I've got this fleet of ships, I've got these apes and baboons and ivory and precious stones and this almug wood. No one's ever heard of that. And so I could let go of God's law. And then we see what happens. Now, Solomon is at this time the greatest king ever. The greatest king in terms of splendor that Israel ever knew. But let's have a look at what he says, what Jesus says to us in Matthew chapter 6, 29, about provisions, about our daily kind of provisions, maybe worrying about life. What does Jesus tell us? Matthew 6:29. So this is about not worrying. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus points back to Solomon. This is why it's really good to read all the Gospels, but then also go back and read the Old Testament so you can understand the references that Jesus says. Actually, if we go with 28, let's go to 28. Here we go. "Why do you worry about clothes?" And obviously he's talked about material possessions as well. "See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor," and we've just read about all his splendor, and it was splendor. Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. So in other words, the way God clothes the flowers of the field was greater than everything we've just read. So why do we need to worry? Why do we need to labor and spin and stress ourselves out, making sure we've got the best clothes or the best material possessions? Work hard, but we don't need to labor or spin, because actually what God provides is even better than what Solomon had all those years ago. And then finally, we've said how Solomon is this great king, and people from, I think it said, didn't it say he had audiences from people all over the world? Literally the whole world was listening to him. we go to Matthew chapter 12, 42, Jesus is having a conversation with the religious leaders, and they want proof that Jesus is who he says he is. And this is Jesus' response. It says, "The Queen of the South will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it." The Queen of the South being the Queen of Sheba. That's another name. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here. Jesus. If you just keep it on that verse. And so people from across the world traveled great distances to hear the wisdom that Solomon had been given by God. And yet we have these religious people, these Pharisees, teachers of the law, being unwilling to listen to Jesus, who is literally the King of Kings, who is literally greater and wiser, more faithful, more loyal, more powerful, richer than Solomon. And they didn't want to listen. This queen traveled thousands of miles to come and listen to him, and they couldn't listen. And so, as a church, are we prepared to listen to Jesus? He's here with us. He's here with us. Are we prepared to listen to him? He's greater than Solomon. You know, people travel thousands of miles to listen to Solomon. Are we prepared to listen to Jesus? We don't necessarily have to travel thousands of miles. Some of us, most of us, I guess, live close in Farnworth, within walking distance of church. And sometimes we find it hard to get here, don't we? Sometimes we find it hard, and yet this Queen of Sheba that Jesus is commending, I guess, or praising, was willing to travel all that way for Solomon. How much further should we be prepared to travel for Jesus, who's greater than Solomon, whose kingdom is greater, more majestic, and everlasting? You know, we're going to be celebrating Christmas, aren't we? And a lot of the Christmas carols are Jesus has an everlasting kingdom. Prince of Peace, King of Kings. And so how much are we prepared to go to? What lengths do we go to? Are we going to stay faithful to Jesus? Are we going to continually read every day that Jesus calls us to obey his commands, obey his decrees, stay humble, not consider that we're better than anyone else? And are we going to be true to the King of Kings, Jesus, who is with us today? And finally, one more thing. Colossians chapter 2, verse 3. If you don't know Jesus, just as people came and asked Solomon for wisdom, we can come to Jesus now and ask him to reveal his wisdom. And Jesus doesn't just chuck all his treasures and wisdom out to, when pigeons are in a town square or a city square and people just toss grain or bread to the pigeons. Jesus doesn't do that. He calls us to him and we seek him. And Jesus says, if you seek me, you'll find me. Because it says in him, in Jesus, are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And so you can, if you don't know Jesus, you can come before him and ask him to reveal to you himself and all his wisdom and knowledge, and he will far exceed any expectations you had. Just as the Queen of Sheba's expectations were blown away by Solomon, Jesus is a greater king than Solomon. And so if you ask him to come into your life, if you seek his wisdom, his knowledge, he will blow your mind and transform and change your life. And and just as the Queen of Sheba will rise at the end of the day, if you receive Jesus' wisdom, his salvation, then at the end of the age, you will rise as one of God's sons or daughters. Thank you.